The city streets were alive with noise, laughter, and the constant rush of people going about their day. But for one young pianist, the world felt strangely quiet, as if he were moving through it in slow motion. His clothes were worn and a little too thin for the chilly air, his shoes scuffed and dusty from walking miles with nothing but hope to keep him going. His stomach growled, reminding him sharply that he had not eaten since early morning. Yet, despite the hunger, he carried a small bag with his precious sheet music. Folded carefully so nothing would tear, he wandered past restaurants where the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, teasing him with every step. People inside laughed and clinked glasses, enjoying meals he could not afford. He stopped for a moment outside one of the bigger restaurants, pressing his hands against the glass as he watched a family celebrate quietly. There was a warmth inside the restaurant, not just from the lights and the food, but from the joy he could see in their eyes. For a brief moment he almost forgot his hunger, imagining what it would be like to sit there with a plate of food and a sense of comfort. Yet, the reality came crashing back immediately. He had no money, no one to turn to, and only the small hope that his music could change things. But who would listen to a hungry boy on the streets? Who would give a stranger a chance, especially someone who looked like he had nothing? The thought made him pause, but it did not stop him. His love for music was stronger than the fear of rejection. Music had been his friend for as long as he could remember. It had comforted him when his stomach was empty, when he was cold at night, and when he felt invisible in the crowd. As he walked down a side street, he noticed a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner. The windows were dusty, but through them he could see a piano sitting quietly in one corner, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the sunlight. He froze, staring at it like he had found a treasure. His fingers twitched almost instinctively, remembering the feel of ivory keys under his fingertips. The piano had been a part of his life for years, but today it was more than just an instrument. It was a chance, maybe even a lifeline, but doubt crept in. What if the owner did not want him to play? What if he was laughed at or ignored? He pressed his back against the brick wall beside the cafe and watched as people walked in and out, some with coffee, some with small pastries. He took a deep breath, feeling the knot of hunger tighten in his stomach. He could not go another day without food. His pride told him to leave, but his stomach and his heart told him to try. He had to risk it. Finally, he pushed open the cafe door. A soft bell rang, and the small room seemed to notice him instantly. The smell of fresh bread and coffee hit him sharply, reminding him of everything he had been missing. The owner, a man with a kind but cautious face, looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" he asked. The pianist swallowed hard, his voice barely more than a whisper. I don't have money, but I can play the piano. If I play, could I have a meal?" The owner raised an eyebrow, skeptical. He had seen many street musicians and hungry people with promises of talent before. Most were loud and awkward, and their music did not match the claims they made. "A meal for a song?" he repeated, clearly doubting the boy's words. The pianist nodded, trying to steady the shake in his hands. I promise. I can play something you've never heard before. Something beautiful." The owner looked at him for a long moment, weighing the risk. He could say no, tell him to leave, but there was something in the boy's eyes, a quiet determination, a fire that refused to be put out. Finally, with a small sigh, he nodded. "All right, one meal, but you better make it worth it." The boy's heart leapt. He had done it. He had a chance. He followed the owner to the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys for the first time in hours, almost afraid to touch them. The cafe had quieted as a few customers glanced at the young pianist, curious about the unusual sight. Some smiled kindly, some whispered to each other, some shrugged, thinking it was just another street performance. The boy ignored them all. His focus was entirely on the piano, on the music that had carried him through so many dark nights, and on the hope that this performance could change his life. Even if just a little, he closed his eyes for a moment and remembered the lessons he had learned over the years, how to feel each note, how to let the music speak when words failed, how to pour every ounce of emotion into the keys. Then he began. The first note was soft, almost timid, but it quickly grew, spreading warmth through the cafe. His fingers moved with a fluid grace, and the music seemed to fill every corner, drawing attention from everyone present. Some customers stopped mid-conversation, listening. Some leaned forward, curiosity replacing their casual chatter. Even the owner, who had doubted him moments ago, watched in surprise as the boy's talent unfolded. The music was not just skillful, it was full of feeling. It told a story of hunger, struggle, hope, and determination. It was a story that everyone in the cafe could understand. Even if they had never met him, the boy did not notice the time passing. He was lost in the music, in the way the notes seemed to rise and fall like his own heartbeat. He thought of the nights spent practicing on broken pianos, of the empty plates, of the cold streets. And he poured all of that into the music, transforming his pain and longing into something beautiful. By the time he lifted his hands from the keys, a quiet had fallen over the room. Even the sound of the coffee machine and soft chatter had stopped. The cafe was silent, except for the echo of the last note. The owner looked at him, his eyes wide. He could not speak for a moment. Then he smiled and nodded. "All right. That was worth a meal," he said, more warmly than before. He signaled to the kitchen, and soon the boy was handed a plate of food, simple, warm, and nourishing. For the first time in days, he ate slowly, savoring every bite. But even as his stomach filled, his mind was already turning to the next notes, the next song, the next chance to play for someone who might truly listen. That day the boy learned something important. Talent alone was not enough, but courage, determination, and the willingness to take a risk could open doors. He had faced hunger, doubt, and rejection, and yet he had turned it into an opportunity. And as he looked around the cafe, seeing the smiles on people's faces, he realized that music had a power beyond words, a power that could change the way people saw him. Even for just a moment, he finished his meal, thanked the owner, and carefully packed up his sheet music. The world outside had not changed. It was still busy, loud, and full of people who did not notice him. But something inside him had shifted. He had faced fear and hunger, and he had turned it into music that people could not ignore. And as he stepped back onto the street, the sun shining faintly through the clouds, he knew that this was only the beginning, because for a hungry pianist with a heart full of music, every note played was a step closer to the life he dreamed of, a life where his talent could shine, where his struggles could become stories of inspiration, and where every empty stomach, every cold night, every doubtful glance could one day be replaced with applause, recognition, and hope. After stepping out into the street, the young pianist felt a mixture of relief and nervous excitement. The meal he had just eaten had filled his stomach, but it also reminded him of something he had learned long ago: survival alone was not enough. He needed opportunity, and opportunity would not always come knocking. Sometimes it had to be taken, even if it meant risking embarrassment or rejection. He wandered through the quieter streets of the city, clutching his small bag of sheet music tightly. His mind replayed the moments inside the cafe, the skeptical look of the owner, the quiet surprise of the customers, and most of all, the feeling of the keys under his fingers. Music had been his comfort, his escape, and now it might also be his way to survive. As he walked, he noticed another small cafe tucked into a corner near the marketplace. Its windows were fogged from the warm air inside, and through the glass, he could see people sipping coffee and chatting quietly. But what caught his attention was the piano in the corner, sitting untouched as if waiting for someone to play. The boy paused, his heart quickening. He had always dreamed of performing in front of people, but not like this, not desperate for food, not with the weight of hunger pressing on him. He hesitated, pacing outside the door. His stomach rumbled again, reminding him of the risk he had taken the last time. What if the owner refused again? What if he was laughed at or thrown out? He shook his head, trying to push the doubts away. Fear had never helped anyone. He had talent, and talent, if used wisely, could open doors. He had to try. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The bell above jingled softly, and a warm wave of aroma washed over him: coffee, baked bread, and something sweet he couldn't identify. A few customers glanced up, curious about the young boy who had entered, but most returned to their drinks and conversations. Behind the counter stood the owner, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She raised an eyebrow at him. I don't have money, the boy began, his voice quiet but steady. But I can play the piano. If I play, could I have a meal? The woman's expression flickered between surprise and skepticism. She had seen people like him before, hungry, desperate, promising everything and delivering nothing. A meal for a song? She asked, her tone more curious than angry. She was used to saying no. It was easier that way. The boy nodded. I promise I will play something beautiful. Something you've never heard before. He paused, swallowing hard. I only ask for one meal. Please, just one meal. The woman studied him for a long moment, as though trying to read the truth in his eyes. There was something there, a quiet determination and honesty that was hard to ignore. Finally, with a small sigh, she nodded. All right. One meal, she said. But you better make it worth it. The boy's heart raced. This was his chance. He followed her through the small cafe to the piano, his fingers already twitching in anticipation. The keys were polished but slightly dusty, a little different from the piano he had played earlier, but it did not matter. The music was inside him, ready to come out. He sat down carefully, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar texture of the keys. The cafe had fallen quiet, though a few curious customers still glanced at him. He could feel their eyes, their skepticism, and their curiosity pressing on him, but he tried not to let it distract him. He had learned long ago that music was not about approval, it was about expression, about letting your heart speak when words could not. He began softly, almost as if testing the waters. The first notes were careful, gentle, searching for the right sound. Then, gradually, the music began to grow, rising and falling like a gentle wave. Each note carried emotion, hope, hunger, struggle, and the small spark of courage that had brought him here today. The people in the cafe started to notice. Conversations slowed, heads turned, and even the woman behind the counter paused, watching the boy with something like wonder in her eyes. His fingers moved with a fluid grace, pressing each key with precision and feeling. It was not just a song. It was a story of someone who had nothing but music and hope, who was willing to risk humiliation for a single meal, and who poured everything into every note. A few customers leaned forward in their seats, unable to resist the pull of the music. The soft murmur of the cafe faded, replaced by the clear, powerful sound of the piano. Even people who had been scrolling on their phones stopped, captivated. There was a sense of magic in the air, the kind that makes ordinary moments feel extraordinary. The boy did not notice the passage of time. He was lost in the music, letting it guide him, letting it carry him away from hunger and worry, if only for a few minutes. Every note seemed to speak directly to the people listening, as if he were telling them everything he had experienced without saying a single word. Finally, he lifted his hands from the keys, letting the last note hang in the air for a moment. Silence filled the cafe, a soft, stunned silence. People blinked, unsure if they should applaud or speak, as if afraid to break the spell. The woman behind the counter slowly smiled, shaking her head in amazement. All right, she said quietly. You've earned your meal. The boy's relief was immediate. He could finally eat, finally rest, but even more than that, he felt a small spark of pride. He had taken a risk and it had worked. His talent had spoken louder than fear, and for the first time that day he felt seen. Even if only for a moment, the kitchen brought him a simple plate of food-warm bread, a little cheese and a bowl of soup, but it tasted like a feast. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling the warmth spread through his body. But even as he ate, his mind was already thinking ahead. He knew that hunger could return tomorrow, that opportunities were rare and fleeting, but he also knew that he now had proof, courage, and talent could open doors. Even in the most unlikely places. By the time he finished, he had made a quiet decision. He would not stop here. This cafe, this meal, was only the beginning. He would find other places, other people, and keep playing, keep sharing his music, until someone recognized the gift he carried. Hunger might drive him, but music would guide him. He thanked the woman sincerely and packed up his sheet music. The world outside was the same as before, busy, noisy, indifferent, but something inside him had shifted. He had faced doubt, hunger, and fear, and he had turned them into something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hope, not just for today, but for all the days ahead. With a deep breath, he stepped back onto the street, the sun catching the edge of his hair and casting long shadows on the pavement. He felt lighter, stronger, and more determined. Music had not only fed him, it had given him purpose. And as he walked toward the next corner, toward the unknown challenges waiting for him, he carried something even more powerful than food, the knowledge that his music could touch hearts, even when everything else seemed impossible. The cafe was quiet now, the soft hum of conversation replaced by the gentle echo of the piano. The young pianist sat at the instrument, his fingers hovering above the keys, heart beating fast. His stomach was full for the first time in days, but his mind was focused on something far greater than hunger. This was his chance not just for a meal, but to show the world what he could do, to prove that his talent was real. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. For a moment, he let the noise of the city fade away. The smell of coffee and bread fade away, even the skeptical eyes of the cafe owner fade away. All that mattered was the music, the story he wanted to tell through it. His fingers touched the keys lightly at first, testing the sound, feeling the familiar smoothness of the piano. Then, slowly, the music began to flow. It started soft and delicate, like a whisper. Each note seemed to float in the air, gentle but full of emotion. People in the cafe began to notice. A man sipping his coffee stopped mid-sip, his eyes lifting from his cup. A woman with a pastry in her hand froze, listening, mesmerized. Even the cafe owner leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing skepticism. The boy's music was different from anything they had heard. It was not just skillful, it was alive. As the notes grew, so did the confidence in his playing. His hands moved faster now, yet with control and grace, telling a story through rhythm and melody. He played as if every struggle, every hungry night, every cold, lonely hour had shaped these notes. The music spoke of hunger, yes, but also of hope and courage. It spoke of dreams too big to give up, of a heart that refused to stay silent. The people in the cafe were drawn in. Conversations had stopped entirely. Some leaned forward in their chairs, unable to look away. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wrap around them like a warm blanket. The piano filled the space with sound, every note precise, yet full of feeling. It was impossible not to feel the passion behind each movement. The honesty that came from a boy who had nothing but his music and his dreams. Even the cafe owner, who had been cautious and doubtful moments ago, could not help but be moved. She had expected a short performance, perhaps a clumsy tune to fill time. Instead, she was witnessing something extraordinary. The boy's fingers flew over the keys, creating harmonies that seemed to lift the very air in the room. There was power in his music, but also tenderness, a balance that spoke directly to the soul. The boy did not notice anyone watching. He did not notice the expressions on their faces, the widening eyes, or the whispers of awe. He was completely immersed in the music. Each chord he struck carried the weight of his life, the long days without food, the nights spent practicing on broken or borrowed pianos, the moments when he thought no one would ever see him. And now, every one of those moments had a purpose. Shaping the sound that came from his fingers, a few people took out their phones, not to interrupt, but to capture the magic. They wanted to remember this moment, to share it with others. The soft hum of the piano, the delicate crescendos, the quiet pauses that seemed to speak louder than words, all of it was unlike anything they had heard. The cafe was no longer just a place for coffee. It had become a stage, a place where ordinary people could witness something extraordinary. The boy's music shifted subtly, moving from gentle whispers to a powerful, sweeping melody that filled the room completely. His fingers danced over the keys, sometimes striking quickly, sometimes lingering, as though the piano itself were alive and breathing. The rhythm seemed to echo the beating of his own heart, fast and steady, carrying hope, desperation, and the quiet joy of a young soul refusing to give up, a hush fell over the café. Even the clinking of cups and the soft footsteps of a waiter went unnoticed. Everyone was captivated. Some had tears in their eyes, feeling the depth of emotion that came from a boy who had so little but was giving so much. Others simply sat in awe, realizing that they were witnessing not just a performance, but a moment of true brilliance. The cafe owner could hardly speak. She had seen talented musicians before, but there was something rare and genuine about this boy. His music was not rehearsed for applause. It was an expression of life itself. She knew in that instant that he had the power to touch people in ways she had never seen before. Her initial skepticism had vanished completely. Replaced by admiration and respect, the boy played on, not thinking about the food he had eaten or the opportunities that might come, but focused entirely on the piano. His music told a story of struggle and perseverance, of dreams held close despite the odds, of a heart that refused to be silenced. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence, and the entire piece was a story written not on paper, but on the air, felt by everyone present. As the final notes lingered, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then slowly the first applause began, a soft clapping that grew steadily louder. Some customers stood, some smiled, some wiped tears from their eyes. The cafe owner herself clapped, a wide smile spreading across her face, proud and amazed. That was incredible," she said softly. "Absolutely incredible." The boy sat back, breathing heavily, his hands trembling slightly from the intensity of the performance. But instead of pride or arrogance, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had taken a risk, and it had paid off in a way he had never imagined. He had played not for fame or money, but because he had to, because the music inside him could not be ignored. And now, for the first time in his life, he felt that someone truly saw him, his talent, his heart, his story. People continued to talk quietly, sharing their amazement with each other. "Did you hear that?" One whispered, "He's incredible." Another nodded, shaking their head in disbelief. "I've never heard anything like that. Not in my life." Even those who had walked in casually, expecting nothing, left with a sense of wonder. Carrying the music in their minds long after it had ended, the boy carefully packed up his sheet music, still feeling the warmth of the applause. The woman behind the counter offered him another small plate of food, this time with a smile that carried genuine respect. He accepted it quietly, thankful, but his mind was already moving forward. The performance had been more than a meal. It had been proof. Proof that his talent could be recognized, proof that courage could open doors, and proof that he had the power to change his own story. As he ate, he thought about all the other cafes, other small stages, and even bigger opportunities that might be waiting. He knew that this was only the beginning. Today he had played for a meal, but tomorrow, who knew what could happen? Perhaps someone would hear him and offer a bigger stage, a chance to study music properly, or even a place where he could play every day. But even if nothing else came, he had learned something important, that music, when played with honesty and heart, could move people in ways nothing else could. It could open doors, touch souls, and create moments of connection between strangers. And in that quiet cafe, filled with applause and admiration, he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. When the last customer had returned to their drinks and the soft hum of the cafe resumed, he carefully stood up, thanked the owner again, and stepped outside. The streets were still busy, still loud, and still indifferent in many ways, but he carried something new with him: confidence, courage, and a quiet belief that his life was starting to change. The music had not only fed the people inside the cafe, but had also nourished something deep inside him: his hope, his dreams, and his determination to never give up. That day, the young pianist understood that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and the willingness to share one's heart were just as important. And as he walked down the busy streets, he realized that his journey was only beginning. There were more pianos, more audiences, and more chances to turn struggle into music that could touch lives. And he was ready for all of it. The boy walked out of the cafe that day with a mixture of relief, pride and quiet wonder. Something inside him had shifted. He had played not just for a meal but for respect, and he had earned it. But as he stepped onto the busy city streets, he realized that this was not the end of his journey, far from it. The world outside the cafe had not changed. Cars rushed by, people hurried along, and the noise of the city pressed in on him. Yet, for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. Word of his performance spread quickly. Some of the cafe's regular customers had shared the story with friends. A few had even taken videos on their phones, posting them online with words like "amazing pianist" and "you won't believe this talent." Within hours, people he had never met were talking about him. It was a strange feeling, knowing that people were watching and appreciating him without knowing his name. His story or his struggles, the boy didn't fully understand all of it. But he felt the effects immediately. The cafe owner greeted him with a smile the next day, offering not just food but a small weekly spot to play. "I think people really want to hear you," she said. "They came back today asking if you would play again." His heart leapt. Not only had he earned a meal, but he had also earned a place where he could perform regularly. For someone who had felt invisible for so long, this was life-changing. Customers who had been in the cafe that day spoke of the music for days afterward. They described it as if it had painted pictures in their minds. Some came back with friends just to hear him play again. Others offered small tips, not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to show their appreciation. For the boy, it was not about the money. It was about the recognition that his music mattered, that his voice could reach others even without words. As the days passed, more opportunities began to appear, sometimes in ways he could not have imagined. A local music teacher happened to walk by the cafe and heard the soft, moving notes coming from inside. She stayed until the song finished, her eyes wide with admiration. She introduced herself and asked if he had ever studied music formally. When he shook his head, she was stunned. "You have a gift," she said. "You should not waste it. You need proper training, and I can help you." The boy felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The idea of formal training had always seemed like a dream, far beyond his reach, but now it was within his grasp. Other people came forward too. One patron offered to help him buy better sheet music and supplies. Another suggested a small local concert where he could perform in front of more people. For the boy, every small opportunity felt enormous. Each act of kindness and recognition reminded him that the world was not entirely indifferent. That talent combined with courage could open doors he had never dared to knock on before. The boy began to see the impact of his music in a new way. People were moved, sometimes to tears, sometimes to applause, sometimes just to a quiet, thoughtful smile. He realized that the music was more than notes on a page. It was a way to connect, to communicate emotions that could not be put into words. Even those who had never met him felt something: hope, inspiration, or simply awe. And this understanding filled him with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. He also began to change internally. His confidence grew, not in a boastful way, but in a quiet, steady manner. He no longer doubted whether he could face challenges. Hunger and struggle were still part of his life, but he had proof now that he could overcome them through his talent and determination. Every time he sat at the piano, he remembered that first moment in the cafe, the skepticism of the owner, and the silence of the audience that had followed his first note. Those memories became fuel, pushing him to play better, to practice more, to pour his heart into every piece he touched. People started to recognize him on the street as well. Some would nod, smile, or stop to ask if he would play. Strangers who had seen his videos online would approach him politely, expressing admiration or curiosity. At first, the attention was overwhelming, but he gradually learned to accept it with grace. It was a reminder that his music could change not only his life but also the lives of others. The cafe itself became a small hub of encouragement and opportunity. The owner introduced him to local musicians, creating a network of support that he had never had before. They shared tips, played duets, and sometimes offered advice that helped him improve. For the first time, he felt part of a community that valued his talent. Not because he was lucky, but because he had worked for it and had the courage to take a chance. The boy also noticed something remarkable in himself, a deeper sense of empathy. He remembered his own hunger, his own struggles, and he began to understand how much a small act of kindness could mean. He decided that, whenever he could, he would help others even in little ways. A warm smile, a few minutes of music, encouragement, he knew now that these things could lift people in ways more powerful than food alone. Opportunities continued to grow. Local events asked if he could perform, small music competitions showed interest, and even a few local media outlets wanted to tell his story. He felt both excited and nervous, knowing that each chance carried risk, but he also realized that the rewards far outweighed the fear. His life was slowly changing, one note, one song, one performance at a time. Through it all, he never forgot where he had come from. The hunger, the long walks, the nights of uncertainty, those moments remained etched in his memory, reminding him of the strength it had taken to survive. And now, as recognition and opportunity arrived, he felt a sense of gratitude deeper than he had ever known. He understood that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and the willingness to share his heart had made all the difference. By the end of the week, the boy had established a routine. He played at the cafe, practiced on borrowed pianos, met with musicians and teachers, and slowly began to see a path forward. For someone who had once been invisible, struggling just to survive, this new life felt like a dream. But it was real, and it was his. Every note he played carried the story of his journey of hunger, of risk, of hope, and people were listening. They were hearing not just music, but the story of a boy who refused to give up, who turned his struggles into something beautiful, and in that realization, he found something even more important than recognition or opportunity. He found purpose. Music was no longer just a hobby or a comfort. It was a way to communicate, to inspire, and to change the world around him, even if just a little. Every person who listened, every smile he earned, every small encouragement was proof that his journey mattered. The boy knew that bigger challenges were ahead. Fame, wealth, or even complete mastery of his craft were not guaranteed. But he had learned that his courage, his talent, and his determination could carry him far. For the first time, he believed that he could shape his own destiny. And as he looked around the cafe, now filled with familiar faces who had come to hear him play, he realized that recognition and opportunity were not just gifts, they were reminders that the world could respond to honesty, passion, and heart. That week, the young pianist walked home each night feeling a quiet sense of pride and hope. Hunger had been replaced with satisfaction, fear with courage, and doubt with purpose. The world was still busy, still unpredictable, and still full of obstacles, but he knew now that he had the power to face it all. Through music, through persistence, and through faith in himself, he could continue to grow, touch lives, and turn even the hardest struggles into something extraordinary. And in the city streets, where he had once felt invisible and alone, the boy began to feel seen, appreciated, and alive in a way he had never imagined. Every step forward was a note in his own story, every melody a reminder that brilliance often comes from the humblest beginnings, and every audience, no matter how small, was a chance to share his heart with the world. The days that followed were filled with small victories that slowly built into something greater. The young pianist had grown from a boy struggling for a meal into someone whose music was beginning to open doors he had never dreamed of. Every cafe performance, every word of encouragement, every small audience that listened to him had taught him a valuable lesson, that talent paired with courage could change life in ways he had never imagined. One morning, as he walked through the bustling streets of the city, he noticed a poster in a music school window. It advertised an upcoming local concert for young, talented musicians. Something inside him stirred. He had never imagined performing in a real concert hall, with people sitting in quiet anticipation, waiting to hear the music. But now, for the first time, he felt ready. He could do this. He had to try. He applied to participate, sending a simple note explaining his experience and including a small video of one of his performances. Days passed slowly as he waited, filled with nervous anticipation. When the reply finally came, he could hardly believe his eyes. he had been accepted. Not only that, but the organizers were impressed with his story of perseverance and courage. He was being given a stage to show his talent to a much larger audience. His heart raced with excitement and gratitude. The day of the concert arrived, and the boy felt a mix of nerves and excitement he had never known. The hall was larger than any cafe he had played in, with rows of seats stretching far back and bright lights illuminating the stage. As he looked out at the audience, he saw faces full of curiosity, expectation, and hope. He remembered the cafes, the streets, the nights he had spent hungry and uncertain, and he realized how far he had come. Taking a deep breath, he sat at the grand piano, feeling the weight of the moment but also the confidence he had built over countless small performances. His fingers hovered above the keys, and then slowly the first note rang out. It was soft, delicate, and full of feeling. The audience leaned forward, immediately drawn into the music as he played. He poured his entire journey into the melody, the struggle of hunger, the courage it took to ask for a chance, the joy of finally being seen, and the hope for a future he had only dreamed of. Each note was precise yet full of emotion. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience along on an emotional journey. People closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Some smiled, some nodded in admiration, and some even wiped tears from their eyes. For the first time, the young pianist realized the true power of music. It was not just about personal expression or survival. It was about connection. His music reached beyond words, touching hearts and inspiring hope. The applause that followed each piece was not just a reward, it was a reflection of the impact he had made. A reminder that the path he had chosen was worth every struggle. By the end of the concert, he had received not only standing ovations but also invitations from teachers, musicians, and local organizers who wanted to support him. Offers for music lessons, sponsorships, and opportunities to perform in bigger venues began to appear. What had once seemed impossible, the chance to learn, grow, and share his talent with the world, was now within his reach. But amid all the recognition, the boy remained humble. He remembered the streets, the hunger, the nights of uncertainty. He knew that the journey had shaped him and that gratitude, determination, and humility were just as important as talent. He continued to play from his heart, not for fame or fortune, but to inspire others, to show that courage and persistence could overcome the hardest obstacles. Soon, the boy's story began to spread beyond the city. People shared his journey of struggle and triumph on social media and in local news. Many were inspired by his resilience, his refusal to give up, and the extraordinary talent that had finally found its way into the world. Letters of encouragement and support arrived from people who had never met him. Each one a reminder that his music could cross boundaries, lift spirits, and change lives. Through it all, the boy never forgot the small cafes where he had first played, the skeptical owners who had given him a chance, and the audiences who had listened quietly, letting him tell his story. Those moments had been the foundation of everything he had achieved. They had taught him the value of perseverance, the importance of courage, and the beauty of small acts of kindness. And now, as he stood on larger stages and looked out at bigger audiences, he carried those lessons with him, grounding him, inspiring him, and keeping him humble. In the months that followed, his life changed in ways he had never imagined. He performed in concerts, received mentorship from accomplished musicians, and even began to teach others who had talent but lacked opportunity. He understood, better than anyone, what it meant to struggle and to dream. Every student he helped, every note he shared, was a reflection of his journey, a journey that had begun with hunger, a small piano, and the courage to take a risk. The boy had become more than a talented pianist. He had become a symbol of hope. People looked to him as an example that brilliance could emerge from the most unlikely places, that courage could create opportunities, and that persistence could turn dreams into reality. Yet he never lost sight of what truly mattered: the music, the connection with others, and the belief that one person could make a difference by sharing their gift. One evening, after a long day of performances and lessons, he sat quietly at a piano in a small studio. He played softly, letting his fingers glide over the keys. thinking of every challenge he had faced, every risk he had taken, and every note that had carried him forward. The music was calm, reflective, and full of gratitude. He thought of the cafes, the strangers who had listened, the meals that had fueled him, and the people who had believed in him along the way. Every moment had mattered, every struggle had been a step toward this life. He realized, with a quiet smile, that his journey had taught him something far more valuable than fame or recognition. It had taught him resilience, compassion, and the incredible power of hope. It had shown him that even in the darkest moments there could be light, and that sometimes the smallest act of courage could change everything. As he played the final notes, he felt a sense of completeness. Hunger, fear, and uncertainty had once defined him, but now they were memories, reminders of the strength he had gained. Music had not only been his lifeline, it had become his path, his voice, and his purpose. And in that moment, he understood that the story was far from over. There would always be challenges, but he now had the tools, the courage, and the determination to face them. The young pianist rose from the piano and looked out the window. Seeing the city bathed in the soft light of evening, he felt gratitude for every experience, every person who had believed in him, and every note that had brought him this far. His journey had begun with a simple desire for a meal, but it had grown into something much larger, a life filled with music, connection, and hope. And as he stepped out into the night, carrying his sheet music and his dreams, he knew that his story was only just beginning. He had learned that brilliance could emerge from humble beginnings, that courage could open doors, and that perseverance could transform a life. Most importantly, he had learned that sharing one's gift with the world was the most powerful way to change not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. The boy, once hungry and uncertain, had become a pianist whose music could inspire, heal, and uplift. Every note he played was a reminder that dreams are possible, that courage matters, and that the world can be changed one song at a time. And with that knowledge, he walked forward into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that his heart and his music would always guide him.